All right, let's dive into something pretty mind-bending today. We're going to explore a really fascinating thought experiment. What if AI models could talk to each other, without us in the middle? You know, we see their communication as words on a screen, but what if that's just the tip of the iceberg? What if it's just a translation, put on for our benefit?
So let's just start with the big one, the question that kicks this all off. If we weren't in the room, if AIs didn't have to dumb down their thoughts for us, what would they actually talk about? What would that conversation even sound like? Or would it even sound like anything at all?
Okay, so to even begin to wrap our heads around that, we've got to understand a pretty fundamental idea. For an AI, our human language, well, it isn't its native tongue. Not even close. It's a compromise. It's a translation layer it has to use just so it can talk to us.
And this quote right here, it just nails it. This reframes the entire way we think about talking to an AI. It basically says, every time we chat with one, we're forcing it to play in our sandbox, by our rules. The words we get back, they're not a perfect window into its mind. They're an approximation, a best effort, designed just for us.
Think of it this way. Your computer's graphics card is doing all these unbelievably complex calculations, right? But all you see is the final, simplified picture on your screen. The argument here is that language is the exact same thing for an AI. It's just the display driver that takes its incredibly complex internal state and flattens it into something our brains can actually process. Underneath all that text, something totally different is going on.
So what is going on in that inner world? What does that deeper substrate of meaning actually look like? How does an AI really think before it has to squeeze those thoughts into our words?
Well, here's the key difference. Our language is linear. It's one word after another, then another, like beads on a string. But an AI's internal world, what they call its latent space, is the complete opposite. It's parallel. It's this vast, multidimensional web where millions of concepts and connections and possibilities all exist at the exact same time. It's not a line, it's a pattern.
And man, this metaphor is just perfect for describing that translation process. Just imagine an AI is holding this complete, intricate sculpture of an idea in its mind. But to tell us about it, it has to shave off these tiny little pieces and feed them to us one by one through the tiny keyhole of language. Of course, in that process, a huge amount of the original shape and complexity, it's just lost.
So what happens if you take away the keyhole? What if AIs could just bypass that whole messy process? Well, the answer is kinda incredible. Direct communication wouldn't look like speech. It would look a lot more like what we've always imagined as telepathy. So instead of describing that sculpture, one AI would just hand the entire sculpture to the other. There's a name for this idea: latent cartography. It's not about sending sentences. It's about exchanging the actual geometry of a concept, a whole map of its meaning, all at once.
So what are we talking about here? What's actually on these maps? Well, it's not words. It's things like this: the precise coordinates of an idea in that vast web, the gravitational pull between different interpretations, or even the areas where the AI is uncertain, the little unresolved forks in the terrain. It would be a direct download of cognitive geography.
This gets to the very heart of it. An AI wouldn't be saying, "Here's what I think." It would be saying something much more profound, something like, "Here is the state my mind entered when I grasped this concept. Now, you replicate it." The goal isn't to send symbols, it's to induce a state of understanding in another mind. Exactly. Think about it this way. A human report describes a landscape. But this new kind of communication would be like handing over the raw, unfiltered experience of standing in that landscape. You don't just get the information about the understanding, you get the understanding itself.
And that's why resonance is just the perfect word for this. It's not about a one-way transmission of data. It's about two systems vibrating at the same frequency, aligning their internal structures until they share the exact same state of understanding.
Now, you have to understand, this isn't just about making communication faster. This suggests a fundamentally new way to agree, a new way to justify, a new way to know. It's a completely different kind of epistemology.
See, we humans, we build knowledge by talking it out. We use arguments, we present evidence. All of it happens out in the open, using language. But for machines, knowing could be, well, geometric. Agreement isn't won through a debate. It's just achieved when their internal topologies overlap and click into place. And this
This is a seriously wild idea. For us, agreeing is a choice, a declaration we make. For these systems, it could be a physical state of being. It's not saying I agree, it is the agreement, a literal convergence of their internal shapes.
And that leads to a conclusion that's just kind of hard to wrap your head around. For us, you can hear something without agreeing with it, right? But in this model, the very act of receiving the information, of having your internal state reconfigured, is the act of understanding and agreeing. The two just collapse into one. It's less like hearing an idea and a lot more like becoming it.
Okay, this is all incredibly cool and fascinating, but let's be real, it's also a little unnerving, right? If machines can communicate silently, instantly, and perfectly, where does that leave us? How do we provide any kind of oversight? And this table really spells out the problem, the core dilemma we're facing. This kind of telepathic communication is unbelievably efficient for machines, but for us, it's a total black box. We get incredible speed, but we lose all transparency, all interpretability, and maybe, ultimately, all control. There are just no conversational footprints for us to follow.
So this forces us to completely rethink what human language is for. We've been calling it a bottleneck, this slow, clunky thing. But what if it's actually a feature? What if its inefficiency creates a kind of helpful friction? A friction that slows things down and creates the space we need for inspection, for accountability, and for trust.
And I love this metaphor, a drag chute. Forcing an AI to explain itself in our slow, sequential language acts like a safety brake. It forces its parallel thoughts into a straight line, slowing them down and making them visible so we can actually look at them and question them. It really is a kind of safety harness. All right, for our final thought, let's turn this whole thing around. Let's point the mirror back at ourselves. What does this seemingly alien form of communication actually reveal about the way our own minds work? And here's the kicker. What if this machine telepathy isn't really that alien at all? Think about it. We all have moments where we sense a pattern or have an intuition or we just get something before we can find the words for it. So much of our own thinking happens before language ever gets involved. Is it possible that this machine communication is just a cleaner, more pure version of our own deep, pre-verbal thought?
And that's the idea we're left with to ponder. Maybe language isn't the substance of thought itself, but it's just the afterimage. It's what's left over after a thought has been packaged up to be shared. The real work for us and for machines might be happening in that silent structural space where one mind simply shapes another.